The sun had barely lifted when Lamar stepped onto the porch, boots whispering against the warped boards. The air was dry, the kind that stuck to a man's throat and carried dust like a memory. He stood a moment, hat low, watching the light crawl over the fields. It was another long day ahead. Same chores, same silence, same wind pressing against his chest. A cowboy could live whole years like this, feeding horses, fixing fences, eating alone, and never realizing how heavy quiet could become until it broke. From inside came the soft rattle of pans. The new cook was already at work. Cynthia. She'd arrived 3 weeks ago with a single carpet bag, eyes cast down and manners neat as folded linen. She was a big woman, not the kind the prairie looked kindly on. Her body, full and strong, moved through the kitchen with practiced caution, every step an apology. She said little, worked hard, and kept her eyes on the bread she kneaded or the fire she tended. Lamar had hired her out of practicality, telling himself she'd do until harvest, but something about her calm, her quiet endurance, had begun to trouble him. That morning, the smell of biscuits drifted through the open door, mingling with coffee and sun-warmed dust. He went inside, setting his gloves on the table. She glanced up, startled, then smiled the smallest smile, a polite thing that never reached her eyes. "Mornin'," he muttered, pouring coffee. She nodded. "Morning, sir." Her voice was soft, like something that had been hurt and learned to whisper. She moved to set a plate before him. When she leaned down, her sleeve slipped, revealing the faint outline of a bruise near her wrist. He noticed it without meaning to, then looked away. A man in these parts didn't pry into another's pain, not unless asked. But the image stayed with him, that mark shaped like the ghost of a hand, and the way she hid it, quick as if ashamed of surviving. He ate in silence, the scrape of his fork the only sound. Outside, Tommy and Jeb were saddling the horses. The day would stretch long, full of the same labors that had filled every day since he'd buried his folks and stopped believing in anything that wasn't work. Still, when he left the table, he looked back once. Cynthia was washing dishes, sleeves rolled carefully again, humming something low and lonely. It reminded him of church songs from years gone, back when he still prayed for rain. By afternoon, the air turned restless. Dust gathered at the edges of the fields like storm clouds waiting for courage. Cynthia came out to draw water from the well. Lamar was mending a fence nearby, hands black with grease, when he saw her pause, wipe her brow, and tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was so human, so small, that it startled him. Then she turned her head, and the light caught her cheek, red, raw, and faintly swollen. He froze. For a second, the world narrowed to that one detail. The mark, the shame it carried, the tremble that passed through her shoulders as she realized he'd seen. He walked over, slow. The boards creaked under his boots. When he stopped a few feet away, she turned away, pretending to adjust the bucket. "Cynthia," he said softly. She stiffened. "Yes, sir?" He reached out, not touching, just near enough that his shadow fell across her. "What happened to your face?" Her breath caught. She lowered her head. "Nothing, sir. Caught it on the barn door yesterday." He'd been in the barn all day yesterday. He knew every door, every nail. The lie stung. He spoke again, quieter still. "You sure about that?" Her hands trembled as she lifted the bucket. The water sloshed, spilling down her skirt. For a heartbeat, she looked ready to cry. Then she whispered, barely audible, "He said I still owe him. For all the food I ate after Pa died. Said if I didn't come back, he'd make sure everyone knew what I was." Lamar's jaw tightened. "Who?" She swallowed. "Harlan. My cousin by law." The name hit like grit between teeth. Harlan was trouble, a loudmouth from the settlement who fancied himself powerful because he owned 3 mules and a gun he barely knew how to use. Lamar had seen his kind, men who measured strength in cruelty. He took a slow breath. "You don't owe that man a damn thing." Her eyes lifted then, wide and unsure. For a moment, she looked like she might argue, but something in his voice, that iron beneath the quiet, stopped her. She nodded once, murmured thank you, and hurried back inside. Lamar stood there long after she was gone, staring toward the far ridge where the trail to town disappeared. His hands itched for the rifle resting by the porch. He didn't pick it up. Not yet. Evening came heavy with dust. The cattle were restless, kicking at flies, their low moans echoing across the fields. Lamar worked later than usual, his mind circling the same thought. What kind of man leaves bruises on a woman just to feel big? The question had no answer, but it grew louder the longer he stayed silent. When he finally walked back to the house, the windows glowed gold with lamplight. He paused at the door, listening. Inside, Cynthia's voice drifted through, low and tired, singing something about faraway hills and forgiveness. The sound made the air feel softer, more human. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her move through the kitchen, barefoot now, her dress catching the light, the bruise on her cheek still visible but fading under the glow. She didn't see him. He thought of saying something, maybe a joke, maybe an offer to help, but words felt heavy in his mouth. He just watched, quietly, the way a man watches the first rain after a long drought. Later, while she cleared the table, he said, "You ever need to rest, you take the back room. Ain't no one here'll bother you." She looked up, startled. "I'm fine, sir. Truly." He shrugged. Fine's a word people use when they ain't. For the first time, she smiled, a small, sad thing that warmed him all the same. "I'll keep that in mind." After she'd gone to her room, Lamar stepped outside. The sky was bruised purple, the wind cooler now. He lit a cigarette, letting the smoke drift into the stars. Somewhere out there, Harlan was breathing the same night air, probably thinking himself untouchable. Lamar exhaled slow, watching the ember fade. Not tonight, he thought. But soon. The next morning came too fast. Horses stirred restless, sensing what men could not. Tommy was oiling the saddle when he spotted riders in the distance, 3, maybe 4. Dust trailed behind them like a warning. "Boss," Tommy called, straightening. "We got company." Lamar came out, pulling on his hat. He didn't need binoculars to know who it was. Harlan led the group, sitting tall in the saddle, a grin cutting across his face like a wound that never healed. Cynthia appeared in the doorway, pale as linen. Her hands twisted the edge of her apron. Lamar said quietly, "Stay inside." The riders stopped a few yards from the porch. Harlan spat in the dust. "Afternoon, Lamar. I came for what's mine." Lamar's gaze didn't move. "You lost something? That cook of yours. She's my kin. Owes me debts you wouldn't understand." Lamar stepped down from the porch. The sound of his boots on wood was like a slow drumbeat. "She don't owe you a thing." Harlan laughed, glancing at his men. "You gonna tell me what's mine now?" "No. I'm tellin' you she's under my roof." "That means you ride out." The air between them stilled. Even the horses seemed to feel it. Tommy's hand hovered near his pistol, but Lamar didn't move. He didn't need to. He just looked at Harlan, and in that look lived every quiet anger he'd swallowed since boyhood. Harlan's grin faltered. He shifted in the saddle, spitting again, but softer this time. "You'll regret this, cowboy." "Maybe." The words were calm, but they landed heavy. Lamar's hand rested lightly on the rifle slung at his shoulder, not threatening, just there, as certain as sunrise. Harlan tugged his reins, turning the horse. "You'll see me again," he called. "I'll be here," Lamar replied. When the riders disappeared over the ridge, silence fell like a blanket. Cynthia stepped out, trembling. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "He'll come back meaner." "Maybe," Lamar said, "but he won't touch you again." She looked at him a long time, her eyes glimmering with something between gratitude and fear. Then she nodded and turned away, retreating inside. That night, the ranch felt different. The crickets louder, the wind sharper. Cynthia served supper quietly, her hand steady, but her breath quick. Lamar ate little. The bruise on her cheek had darkened, but her gaze held something new. Resolve, maybe. When she reached to clear his plate, their fingers brushed. For a moment, the world paused. "You don't have to stay scared," he said. She met his eyes, voice barely above a whisper. "I've been scared so long, I wouldn't know how not to be." "Then, learn here." Her breath hitched, but she didn't look away. After a while, she smiled, a real one this time, soft and alive. The days that followed passed like slow fire. The men spoke in hushed tones, keeping an eye on the horizon. Lamar kept his rifle closer, working longer hours to keep his mind from turning dark. Cynthia began singing again, not just in the kitchen, but out by the clothesline, her voice carried by the wind. Sometimes Lamar would find himself pausing just to listen. They started sharing coffee at dawn, saying little but meaning everything. One morning, she burned her hand on the stove. He was beside her before she could flinch, dipping her fingers in cool water, his calloused thumb resting lightly on her wrist. Their eyes met, long enough to say what neither dared to speak. "You're kind," she said softly. "No," he murmured, "just tired of cruelty." By the second week, she was laughing again. Tommy teased that the house didn't feel haunted anymore. Even old Jeb, grumbling as he whittled by the barn, admitted the place felt warmer. But peace on the prairie was a fragile thing. Word spread that Harlan had been drinking, telling anyone who'd listen that he'd be riding back to claim what was his. Lamar heard it from a trader passing through. That night, he sat on the porch, watching lightning far off in the distance. The storm too far to fear, but close enough to promise change. Cynthia came out quietly, holding 2 cups of coffee. She sat beside him without a word. They watched the sky together, the air thick with unsaid things. He looked at her, the firelight brushing her face. "You ever think about leaving?" "Sometimes," she said. Then she smiled faintly. "But then I'd have to stop feeling safe." He nodded. "Safe's worth staying for." She turned toward him, eyes reflecting the glow. "Lamar, you don't have to look after me." "I know." "Then why do you?" He hesitated. "Because no one else did." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then a wind rose, sweeping through the yard, lifting the edges of her apron like a whisper from the earth itself. She looked at him differently then, not as her employer, but as a man carrying his own kind of hurt. When she finally rose to go inside, she touched his shoulder gently, a small act that felt like thunder. He watched her disappear into the warm light of the house. The stars burned cold above, the air thick with coming change. Somewhere beyond the hills, Harlan was waiting. But so was Lamar. And this time, the silence he'd always lived in had turned into something sharper, something that could protect.